What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we chatted with David Ramil of Locked On Heat as the Miami Heat hold on for the win in Game 3 behind a huge night from Bam Adebayo, stepping up with no Jimmy Butler in the second half against the Boston Celtics. Is Miami poised to take a commanding 3-1 series lead in the Eastern Conference Finals? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting, the NBA playoffs, esports, the NBA draft, and more. And speaking of the NBA draft right now, you can take a look at the odds over at BetOnline for who will go number one overall in this year's 2022 NBA draft. Right now, Jabari Smith Jr. at minus 140 to be the number one overall selection for the Orlando Magic. Then you got Chet Holmgren at plus 190, Paolo Banchero bringing up the rear at plus 475. So for that and more, be sure to check out all the different odds available at BetOnline. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is David Ramil from Locked On Heat and Locked On NBA, who you can follow on Twitter at DRamil13. David, the Miami Heat taking a 2-1 edge in this conference finals series against the Boston Celtics, washing the taste out of their mouths of that 25-point loss in South Beach, coming away 109-103 win in Game 3 of the series. And the MVP of this game for the Heat, without a question, has to be Bam Adebayo. Walked away from this game with 31 points, 10 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 steals, 1 block, stepped up in a really big way with no Jimmy Butler in the second half of this one. But my question is, what do the Heat need to do, or maybe more specifically, what does Bam Adebayo need to do more of to have these strong performances more consistently? Is it just a matter of being more aggressive, or maybe the offense actively running through him a bit more? What is it?
It's a combination of a lot of different factors. For one, Bam has never really been required to be the go-to scorer on a team with Jimmy Butler or other scorers that have been on this team in the past. Bam has never really been counted on to provide that kind of scoring punch. Now, his playoff numbers have been lower than even his usually low numbers during the regular season. Having said that, Game 3 was a combination of all these different things playing in Bam's favor. For one, it was the return to Kyle Lowry. 2, Robert Williams was out. And then 3, to your point, Bam just said, you know what? I need to be more aggressive. He spoke about it after the game, talked to media and said, I have to be more aggressive, recognize that there was something needed of him on the offensive end of things. And it worked out really, really well. Again, with that combination of all those factors, he wound up having a very, very effective game. He looked to get to the basket early, and he saw a lot of daylight there because no Williams, no legitimate shot blocker. He could take advantage of his speed against an older Al Horford. He can use his strength when he goes matched up against Marcus Smart or smaller wing players. And so he was able to just get to the basket. And then with Lowry there directing the offense, again, this was Lowry's first game in this series. He was able to find Bam on cuts, initiate offense, would dump it into him into the low post, and get Bam going early on. And once he started hitting those first few shots, we started to see this snowball effect where he was more and more aggressive throughout the rest of the game.
Would you like to see, and I know you mentioned, the return of Kyle Lowry, we're going to hit on that here in just a moment, of course, one of the bigger storylines from this game, but would you like to see Bam, take a bigger role and maybe take more ownership over, his offensive role within this, Miami Heat team? Obviously, when Jimmy Butler is out there on the floor, he's going to be kind of the go-to guy. You've got guys like Tyler Herro, you've got other bucket getters, but at the same time, It seems like the Heat might be, better when he's got a bigger role offensively.
Yeah, I think there's just some balance. Like if Jimmy had been able to play the whole game, and even in the minutes that Jimmy was out there during the first half, like he seemed more traditionally passive than what we've seen from him, certainly during the playoffs when he's been one of the leading scorers in the postseason. So there has to be a balance there, a blend. And honestly, I am in the very distant minority as far as Heat fandom and Heat cover, people who cover the team in general, because to me, I recognize what Bam does and his impact in so many different areas defensively as the central hub for the playmaking and things of that sort. So I recognize what Bam can do and don't necessarily require him to be more aggressive. There are times where I'd like to see him be more active. Usually that's not the case. Yes, I guess I agree with you. It is fun to see this version of Bam because he is such a unicorn, right? He is this combination of size and speed that we rarely see at this position. And given all that, he should look to get to the basket more. But you don't want him to force it. You don't want him to force those kinds of actions that lead to turnovers, particularly when you're playing a game that's as good defensively as the Celtics are. So I think it was mostly him dictating the pace, but also finding it within the flow of what the defense was allowing.
Now, Miami led by as many as 26 in this one. It looked like it was going to be a blowout the whole way through,
Yep.
no contest, what have you. Second half, Boston rallies. They make a push. They cut this game to a 1-point lead, just under 3 minutes to go. I know missing Jimmy Butler played into probably a big part of the revival for the Celtics in the second half. But what else really stood out to you, David, as the lead was diminished?
Well, Boston was finally starting to hit shots. They got a lot of emotional support from their fans who had been basically just taken completely out of it in the first half. They were booing that crowd. And look, the lead was 15 points at halftime. And already you start to see, well, they're starting to get a little bit more momentum in their favor. Once Jimmy sits out to start the second half, Victor Oladipo still kind of finding his footing there. And he played a great game defensively. Offensively, he was struggling to some degree. And then it just was a matter of time for them to get big shots after big shots from either Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, or somebody else. And I think that really started to chip away at that lead. Eventually, Miami has done what they've done all season, which is find their identity, continue to hold off the opponent, do what they have to do, whether it's without Jimmy, without Bam, without Lowry, or somebody else. They always find a way to just carve out a victory. And that's exactly what it was. It was a perfect Heat win for this season because it's just very symbolic of the way that they found a way to win all season, even while they've been missing key players.
And speaking of hitting big shots and speaking of missing some key players, the guy who stopped the bleeding when it was, just cut down to a 1-point lead, Max Strus hit a huge 3-pointer. And then the Heat went on to score a few more points, kind of give themselves a little bit of a buffer there in the closing moments of this game. But this Max Strus has one of the best NBA stories, right, David? You got a guy with not invited to the draft combine, undrafted, bounced around on a couple two-way deals, had an ACL injury, and managed to recover from all of that, against all the odds. Now he's starting for the Miami Heat in the conference finals. Just how big has his impact been for this Heat team?
Well, I think they've only lost 3 games in total. There was a regular season loss at the end of the season, but once he was inserted in the starting lineup in place of Duncan Robinson, they went on a long win streak, and then they kicked it off in the playoffs. They've really only, with the whole lineup intact, they've only lost a handful of games with Strus in there. And it's just, he's evolved into a much more dynamic player than what we expected. The shooting was always there, and maybe he was pigeonholed to some degree, but he also brings an extra little athleticism that Duncan does not. His defense has vastly improved. I was criticized by some fans when I said earlier in the season that Robinson was a better defender than Max Strus, because he was. He really was certainly a much better team defender. But Max has been able to just find a way to move his feet more effectively over the course of the season. Maybe it's just with more experience, just as being put in the position where he can succeed. There are still moments there where he struggles defensively, and I think that will always be a weakness of his game. But overall, he attacks the basket. He's constantly in motion in a way that Robinson is not, and he knocks down big shots. He's willing to do so. He spoke after the game about Lowry actually drawing up the play that you mentioned and kicking it out to a wide open Strus after a screen from Bam Adebayo and PJ Tucker to get him wide open. And he had all the confidence in the world. Like, this is a player who 2 years ago wasn't even in the league, right? He was a two-way deal. And now all of a sudden he's just a major contributor as a starter on an Eastern Conference finalist team. That's amazing. His journey, as you said, was a fantastic one. And he's really stepped up over the course of the season to really provide a scoring punch for this team.
Now, Kyle Lowry made his return in this game to the tune of 11 points, 6 assists, 4 steals, 4 of 11 shooting. Look, Lowry missed a couple games against Atlanta, 4 games against Philly, missed the first 2 against Boston. Is he back for good, or is this injury situation going to be one that just continues to be monitored where we should expect him to maybe miss more time, depending on how much further the Heat go in the playoffs?
I can't say for certain. The Heat traditionally have been very quiet about injuries like this, so it's kind of left to guesswork. But, given his age and the fact that he has tried to come back from the hamstring during the Sixers series and then wound up having to take more rest, I think it's going to continue to be a concern if Miami's able to advance past Boston into the NBA Finals. There's always that possibility, especially, again, given his age. But I would say that he's probably going to continue to play through it. I think we heard rumblings that he was going to be available in the Sixers series had it gone 7. That obviously wasn't necessary. They were able to put him away in 6. And then he wanted to rest him because this team does see themselves as a legitimate title contender. They had a bigger eye on the prize. And so they wanted to make sure that Lowry was going to be healthy. And so that's why they set him out in for first couple of games against the Celtics. Having said that, when the Celtics blew him out in game 2, it was clear that they needed something different, and Lowry absolutely provided. So the injury is going to be concerned, but what he brings to the table, it's never really been precipitated on any kind of athleticism or anything like that. He's not going to be the most active player out there, certainly not at this age, but he gets it done. It's the leadership, the ability to be vocal and communicate with his teammates, to find Bam Adebayo, to find cutters, to orchestrate the offense and the defense, and he provides this kind of a spark even at his age. He was absolutely a huge part of Miami's win yesterday, and certainly down the stretch when they were able to pull away and seal the victory.
The ability to get those guys in the spots that they need to be in to succeed. One of the true, best floor generals left in the game currently, as we're seeing the NBA trend towards more dynamic guard play with guys who are maybe not traditional point guards by any stretch of the imagination. But, David, I'm like looking at these two teams and I'm legitimately concerned that like whichever team comes out of this series is just going to be like hobbling towards the finish line, because you see Marcus Smart and Jason Tatum dealing with injuries. No Robert Williams. You've got the Miami Heat dealing with all of their, various injuries, and whoever's going to come out west is just going to look at this team and it's going to be like the Toon Squad from Space Jam, just all beat up on the bench. Last thing here, David, just what needs to be the most important thing for the Miami Heat as they approach game 4 of this series, the thing that they need to be focusing on the most?
Well, I think it's a defensive pressure. A lot of their offense seems like it's just built off of that tenacity, and there's a lot of discussion about whether or not the Heat won the game or whether the Celtics lost it. But if you go back and look at the shots and the footage and the turnovers and everything else like that, a lot of it was just based on Miami having that steadying presence in the first half that they got away from when Jimmy Butler wound up sitting out the second half, and changed the course of the game, and then they were able to kind of regain it. So to me, it's a lot of that defense and building their offense off of that. They have struggles with their 3-point shot. A surprise considering the fact that they were leading the league in 3-point percentage during the regular season. They just haven't been able to find that 3-point shot. Tyler Hero, I think he's going to get his minutes cut even more because he's struggled in this playoff series against the Celtics. He struggled against the Sixers as well. He just really hasn't been able to find his touch so far. So for this team, if you're going to be going through players in and out, because at this point, I would imagine, an injury is bound to happen just because we've seen that happen regularly during the playoffs. I think you just continue to lean into your defensive identity, shut down what Boston does well, pressure them, force those turnovers. And luckily, this team does have that kind of depth. They were able to bring in a guy like Oladipo, who didn't play at all or hardly play during the regular season, and he was a huge factor in yesterday's win. So that's, to me, the areas of focus. Just continue to pressure ball handlers like Tatum and Brown in particular, whose dribble was a little shaky, get him to force turnovers, and then that leads to fast break opportunities on that they can continue to build off throughout the course of the game.
Can the Miami Heat come out on top in game 4 against the Boston Celtics, take a commanding 3-1 series lead? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more, of course, over at Locked On Heat. David, appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime. Thanks so much for having me.